All right, welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. We're actually in the same city, but different locations right now. Anthony is sitting in Central Park, and I'm envisioning you sitting on a park bench like George Costanza in Seinfeld when he was sitting by the water, and then he gets up and starts running with the birds blocking in the background.
Yeah, they had
Is
a
that what
deal
I'm?
with
Is
the
that what you're
pigeons.
seeing right now?
Yeah, they had a deal with the pigeons. Remember that they'd stay away from the statue defecation or turn a blind eye to that as long as the pigeons got out of the way when cars or runners came by.
Yep,
Haven't seen any
exactly.
pigeons yet, but it is humid in New York today. It is unbelievable. I had a pretty good walk to get up here after dropping Margot at Penn Station, and I tell you what, it's always been a little interesting walking in New York, and you obviously know that, Michael. The streets are busy, and people will randomly just stop and stare up at a tall building or something. But right now, the phenomenon of people walking while staring at their phones makes it even more adventurous because you see them coming. They're like a block away. They're staring at their phone as they walk. Now they're 20 feet away. Now they're 10 feet away. And it's so tempting to just stop and let them smash into you. But the number of times that you watch and then all of a sudden they're 2 steps away and he still isn't going to look up. And then at the last possible second, I'll turn a little bit, but then they'll look like, oh, well, and you think, what is it really that important to look at the Instagram reel you're watching when you walk down this crowded street right now? How about you just pay some attention to those around you?
Yeah, I do feel like you might be talking about me.
Well, I didn't see you on the street, so
yeah.
But there are a couple people that might walk the same way you do.
Yeah. I have a tendency to do that. So by the way, our next live show is April 7th. That's Monday, 4 days from now at Tuttle's at 7 p.m. So put that on your calendar, everybody that's listening, and Anthony. So again, April 7th, 7 p.m. at Tuttle's. And by the way, the next Wood and Sticks podcast, Kevin Gore's Wood and Sticks podcast, is at Insight Brewing at 7 p.m. on April 16th. I did the last month's show. It was a blast. Maybe Anthony will be the guest this month, Anthony. April 16th, Insight Brewing, Gorg's Wood and Sticks podcast. That'll come right before the Wild open the playoffs against, who do you think they're going to play? Winnipeg, Dallas, Vegas, one of those 3 teams. Who do you think
it isn't going to be Dallas?
Why not?
You don't think Dallas?
I think Dallas is going to catch Winnipeg.
You
don't think Dallas can catch Winnipeg?
I don't think so, but
4
I haven't
points
looked at
back,
it that
game
way,
in
actually.
hand, and they have one. I think they have one head-to-head. They're 4 points back, game in hand. There's a chance that we're not going to Winnipeg.
Well, I would love to not go to Winnipeg, although Winnipeg at this time of year is not nearly as bad as it is during the winter.
Well, do you remember 2018 when Winnipeg actually had trouble getting down to Minnesota and had to divert to Duluth, essentially go back, then flew the day of the game? It was the only win the Wild had in the entire playoff series.
That's true, but I also I've spent some time in Winnipeg in the summer over the years when I used to be involved with the St. Paul Saints, and we also were up there another year. We played there late in the regular season, maybe the final week or something, and it was 75 and sunny, and it's not a bad town when it's summertime. It's miserable in the winter. There's no question about that. But I don't know. I guess for a long time I just kept thinking the way that the Wild would match up with Dallas would be if the Wild caught Colorado. And I know Winnipeg has been slipping a bit lately. I kind of feel like there might be 2 factors there. One is that they're coming to earth a bit, where I've thought all year that they were not a very intimidating number 1 seed in the West, because I just they don't strike fear in you, other than the fact that they've got a great goaltender who's capable of stealing a series at any time. But I never felt like if the Wild got in and drew the Jets, that it was just going to be an absolute overmatched situation. But I also think it might be a team that just started to coast. They were so comfortably in their spot. What was it, 2 weeks ago? They were 10 points clear of anybody else in the West. And you might just get a team that hasn't had that kind of urgency. And now all of a sudden, maybe Dallas putting a little scare in them wakes them up. And I think they find a way to hang on and win the division and be the 1 seed.
Yeah, we will see. I do think that they also have some injuries that are hurting. Neil Pionk's been out. I think Neal's on his way back into the lineup. The one that if the Wild caught Winnipeg and he was not in the lineup, that would be a real big loss. Is Gabe Vilardi. Gabe has played really well against the Wild since he's been in Winnipeg, and right now he's out, and there's no word on when he's going to come back. But Pionk is at least practicing. Vilardi has not. I think they've had Kapari out as well, and I think Luke Schen's been out a bit. So they've got some injuries. Obviously, we know the Wild have some injuries, and the Wild, Anthony, I'm just curious on what you think of what's going on with the Wild right now, because it's just hard when you win 1 out of 6 games at this time of year to just buy the positivity that comes after some of these last 2 losses. Granted, they got points, but they've gotten 4 out of the last 12 points in a playoff race. That just doesn't strike confidence into my being going into the playoffs. Obviously, we know Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek. We're starting to see the light peeking out from the end of the tunnel there. But I'm concerned about the way they're playing. Like, I don't think that any team that they face in the playoffs is really going to be, looking at the Wild as a big challenge.
Well, I'm not sure about that. The only thing I'd say about the concern in this stretch is that we knew that 5-game stretch was probably going to be among the most challenging 5-game stretches that the Wild would play this season, where it was 5 in a row against playoff teams and going down to Dallas and then having to come home and play Vegas the next night on the second of back-to-backs when Vegas was sitting there. Then you get the Caps and then the 2 games against New Jersey, that you could be playing really well on top of your game and drop 3 out of 5 in a stretch like that. And that's a stretch of the schedule where everybody's going to struggle. And
yeah, but to that point, though, that just shows that you're not a contender. Like, if you're just looking at it, it's like, oh, they're playing a bunch of playoff teams.
Well,
and you can't figure out a way to win. I mean,
they're playing just real quick. I mean, playoff. They're playing playoff teams and they're still shorthanded. So, but I'm just saying that that's a stretch where to just look at it and say, well, you only got 4 points out of 12 over a 6-game stretch. There's more to it than that. And, I think those are the teams that you have to beat if you go into the playoffs. But I will say, heading into that stretch, we showed the graphic when the Wild were in Dallas. Going into that game, the Wild were 5th in the league in terms of win percentage against playoff teams at that point. And I know there's this perception, well, they can't beat the good teams. What they've actually hurt themselves with in the second half is losses to non-playoff teams. They've actually played the playoff teams about as well as most. And now I think we looked at it again the other night after they had lost the game at home against New Jersey, and I think they had slipped now to like 11th or 12th or something against playoff teams. But almost nobody has a winning record against playoff teams. When the Wild were 5th, there were only 6 teams that had a better than 500 win percentage, not points percentage. I'm talking true win percentage, had a better than 500 win percentage against the teams that were in the playoffs at that point. And now that changes a little bit day to day when, the playoff field changes, but still the point was they were 5th. And, that tells you that they're more than capable of playing against the best. I just think, what it's like when you look at a schedule. There are some nights where the team will refer to them as scheduled losses. And I thought that Vegas game was one of those to some degree. Now, the Wild also had what I thought should have been a scheduled win against New Jersey a couple nights later and lost at home when New Jersey had to play in Winnipeg the night before. The Wild were rested. It was a 5:00 start. That was one where it was, I thought New Jersey probably is looking at it saying it's a scheduled loss, and yet they came in and won a game in St. Paul. So, those kind of things tend to even out. I just don't think I don't have a major concern with the way the Wild are playing. I just think it's a team they just don't have much margin for error with the players that they're missing. And I think we've seen that over these last couple. But to find a way in both New Jersey and New York, when down in the third period, to get a point, when you're at this point in the season, any point you get in a game you trailed in the third period against 2 teams playing for their playoff lives. I mean, the Devils and the Rangers in particular, they have 0 margin for error left. And I thought they came out and played with some great jump in the game in Manhattan. And yet Minnesota found a way to get a point. And if they get a point a game the rest of the way, they're going to be in the playoffs. And I think they will be a handful for whether it be Winnipeg or Vegas. We've always laughed and joked, not joked, but been realistic about the fact that for whatever reason, Dallas is a tough matchup for the Wild over the years. But if they're healthy, I don't think they're a typical wild card team, and I do think they'd be in a position to be competitive against either one of those division winners.
Yeah, we'll see. Last night, it is funny. The Wild have been defended well for so long, and unable to score. Last night they get a ton of chances because the Rangers are so bad defensively, and then they can't outscore their mistakes. Just really perplexing mistakes by a number of players that normally you rely upon, and it cost them. They didn't get great goaltending last night. Weren't very great in their own zone, some bad turnovers at both blue lines, and it eventually puts them in a position where against the team they should win, beat, they wind up not. And that's my point about just, looking at the bright side here and like, oh, they rallied for a point in the third. Jack Hughes is out for New Jersey too, yet they beat the Wild 2 games in a row. And last night you have a team that has been awful, and you're unable to come away with a victory. I just think that, this is just not trending the right way.
Well, yeah, obviously you've got to find a way to win these games. And I thought the game in New Jersey was a good battle. I thought that was the kind of play that that's the way the Wild have to play to have success. The game in New York against the Rangers, I agree with you. I thought that was one that, boy, they are a mess in their own zone.
Yeah.
And they have, it appears, zero interest in playing the game the right way, defending the right way. And I'm talking about some of their veteran, like go-to guys like Zibanejad, Kreider. I mean, these guys have been the heart and soul of that team. And then you look at that blue line, and what a disaster that is. I mean, I like Will Borgen as a player. I don't know that he's a first pair guy, but I like him as a player. And the rest of that crew, Adam Fox I think he thinks he's a right wing, and it has about as much interest in coming back defensively as nobody. I just thought that was a game where I thought the Wild could have scored 7 goals in that game. They did get 4, and but it was uncharacteristic, the mistakes they made in their own zone, and it was one of those nights where they really needed Gus to step up and bail them out, and he wasn't able to do it. Hey, by the way, just for the record, those sirens are from your location, not mine, because I'm in the middle of the park.
I know. I offset. So Alex, our producer, had me turn off the air conditioning because it was buzzing. So I offset that by opening the window to make it worse. So
well, as we were getting ready to
Alex.
do the show, and we were talking about, hey, let's find a quiet spot, and I'm thinking as I leave Penn Station, walking through Times Square, and yeah, just find a quiet spot somewhere in Manhattan. That'll be great. So I decided I'll just walk up to the park because there's no cars, there's no horns, there's no sirens. And then you sitting in your cushy hotel room has got the sirens blaring.
Yeah. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back on Worst Seats in the House. They say knowledge is power, and power is having a great plumber and electrician on your speed dial. Get fast, reliable repairs and keep your home warm and worry-free by going to Aquarius Home Services. Right now, for a limited time, save $98 on plumbing or electrical repairs from a company you could trust, and this way you can stay comfortable as the seasons change. So visit AquariusHomeservices.com right now to get your spring project done fast. That's AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended, and don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
When it comes to great steaks, it's all about the marbling. And there's a 1 through 12 scale for marbling that will measure what the quality is of the steak. And for Feller's Ranch Wagyu, it's some of the best you'll find. They won't sell their steaks unless they're at a marbling level of 6 to 10 on a scale of 12. It's some of the best steaks you'll find. Just for reference, USDA Prime can be called USDA Prime as long as it's at 3 or 4 on that same scale. This steak is some of the best I've had. You can find it at fellersranch.com. Their vans are in the cities every week. They can deliver it to you. There are also a couple of spots within the cities where you can pick it up. You won't be disappointed. If you're having a great meal and you want to have steak, there's no place to go that's better than Feller's Ranch.
If you're looking for a refreshing THC drink, well, check out Giggly. It tastes like your favorite cocktail with no aftertaste and just pure, bold flavor. It's made with real fruit juice and all natural ingredients. It's a Minnesota-made gem. You can find it at liquor stores and Quick Trip locations across Minnesota, or get it shipped nationwide. Plus, with a new low pricing and low-calorie options, it's the perfect guilt-free sip. Try Giggly today.
Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta back here on Worst Seats in the House. April 7th is our next live show at Tuttle's. That's at 7 p.m. Anthony, before we talking about the Sirens, you mentioned Gustafson. And, look, I get why, obviously, the coaching staff right now is riding him. I feel bad for Marc-Andre Fleury. This has got to be the most unceremonious ending to a Hall of Fame career maybe ever, that you've got to bench this guy because this team has put itself in such a meat grind to make the playoffs. It's such a shame. But because they've been riding Gus really hard, I thought at the beginning of the game last night, I thought he worked his way into the game, but I thought he was really fighting the puck. And then as the game went on, obviously he let in some leakers. I know how badly they want to get a victory on Friday night in New York to make this a decent road trip where you get 4 out of 6 points. But Marc-Andre Fleury earlier in the season was playing really well. Do you feel, especially with an afternoon game on Sunday, that now is the time to give Philip Gustafson just a break? They are going to, I just am so worried that they are going to just gas this guy going into the postseason, Anthony. And I just wonder if, I know it wasn't according to plan, but maybe Marc-Andre has to start against the Islanders to give him just a little bit of a respite here. What do you think?
I don't know. And I thought Gus was, I know I said that it was a night where they needed him to come through with a save. I thought he was good early in the game. I thought then as the game wore on, there were a couple where I know he'd like them back, including the game winner. I mean, even though I know it was a breakdown in the defensive zone for Minnesota, but that's the puck going under a goalie's pad in that spot is one every goaltender is going to tell you that he should make the save there. I think the way they've ridden Gustafson has been okay because of the fact that it's been spots like this week where it's games every other day without travel. If you look back at that homestand, that was the key. They were playing every other night and they weren't going anywhere. There weren't a lot of practice days, so he was getting those days off. And kind of the same thing on this trip where it's 3 road games, but where the travel is a bus ride today from Manhattan to Long Island. And that's not like jumping on a plane after the game and getting in late and being disrupted with sleep. So there's as much rest as you could possibly have for 3 road games in 5 nights. But I just think right now that, and even though I've felt all along that when you start to do the math and you look at the other teams, and I know we talked more in detail about this on last week's show, where it's the teams catching you would have to go on ridiculous runs to pass the Wild right now. I mean, they're going to be in the playoffs, but I also think like you just don't want to shift into any kind of mode where it's anything less than pedal to the metal right now. So to me, I play Gus in this game unless for some reason, as they meet today and do their training and stretching and everything, if he just looks or sounds or acts like a guy that needs a break, and I haven't talked to him today. I haven't talked to any of the coaches or anything today. If it's something like that where he feels like he needs a respite, but if it's anything short of that, I play him in this game and then I probably play him again on the Sunday afternoon game at home. You get a couple days off then before you play Wednesday, and I think it's just the reality that Marc-Andre Fleury might be down to maybe a start in those back-to-backs in Calgary, Vancouver, and perhaps that final game of the season if the Wild are clinched with their spot, and that might be it. I mean, we might be looking at the guy that's got 2 games left in his career.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you that the Wild are going to make the playoffs, but I think that you think it's just a gimme, and I definitely don't. I mean, remember, I am the one for a month ago was saying that watch out for St. Louis. And I'll tell you, I'm looking at Calgary's schedule right now. They got 2 games against the Ducks, 2 games against the Sharks to go, and 2 games in hand on the Wild. The Wild needs some 2-point games here, not
but
1 point their
Calgary's
way to the
also
playoffs.
don't they have 4 games against playoff teams? I think they still play.
Yeah, well,
I looked at this last night. Don't they play
Minnesota?
And don't they play
2
Vegas
against
twice?
Vegas, and then play LA once.
Yeah, so I mean, they've got out of 8 games, they've got 4 against teams that are in the playoffs. I mean, that isn't a cake schedule. I mean, the Wild also have the Sharks and the Ducks.
The teams that are toast, the team that is toast here is Vancouver. I mean, they are just an absolute mess. Watching them a couple times lately, and they've got 5 games against playoff teams, including 1 against Minnesota. This stretch will really determine whether the Wild finish 7th or 8th. I think St. Louis, they play the Penguins tonight, but then they got 3 games in a row against Colorado, at Winnipeg, at Edmonton. Edmonton should have both Draisaitl and McDavid back by that game, and we but we did see the Blues win in Colorado the other day. Then they closed the season against Seattle and Utah. Let's talk a little bit about last night's game a little more, Anthony. Man, Johansson and Nyquist, really good, both on different lines as well. I thought Johansson and Zuccarello were terrific with Freddie Gaudreau. And I thought Gus Nyquist, even strength, was his best game, and then obviously scored the goal on the power play, and then shorthanded pressures Trocheck into the turnover, and then takes Faber's pass and sets up Johansson coming into the zone for the shorthanded goal. This was the Gus Nyquist that we all expected that we'd see when the Wild made that trade 16 games ago.
Yeah, I thought he was good in New Jersey too. It was the first time that we had seen him be aggressive with some pucks and actually make some confident puck plays. I don't think what I've been surprised by is he doesn't have the speed he had 2 years ago when the Wild brought him in. And, he is a little bit of an older player, but when they brought him in that year, his speed was noticeable. Now, I didn't watch him play enough last year, but when we saw him, he was pretty good against Minnesota when he scored 75 points last year. But he's a different player than what we saw a couple of years ago. I agree with you, though. I think these two games were indicative of what he might be able to bring, and it'll be really interesting as we start to break down and take a look at how the Wild structure their lineup once they get these last two missing pieces back, and where a guy like Nyquist lands, where a guy like Johansson lands, because all of a sudden you'll be looking at a team with some options. I felt last night in the game against the Rangers, it was one of the first times in, who knows, maybe 8 or 10 games where Hines actually had two lines that were both going where he had some options. In most of these other nights, it's been try to find three guys that are going and throw them together and make a push in the third period. But I thought the Rossi Boldy line with Foligno was good again. Maybe it might have been Marco Rossi's best game in the last 8 or 10. And then I thought you're right. I thought the Johansson Zuccarello line was terrific. And I know Gaudreau was with him early and Hartman was with him late, but it was more of those wingers that were driving that line. And it was one of the few games where he had two options. So I think as you go forward now and you say, all right, well, now throw Kaprizov back in there, throw Eriksson Ek back in there, and you start to see what this lineup could look like. And I guess to some degree did look like before Christmas when they had the best record in the NHL. I mean, Johansson gets bumped down somewhere, Gaudreau gets bumped down somewhere for sure. I don't know where Rossi lands on that, but that's why I believe that this team will not be looked at as a normal wild card team. And when you look at the overall standings and where the Wild sit right now, 89 points. Look at the teams you're talking about as contenders in the East, the top three in the Atlantic. They're like, 94, 93, 92. I mean, we're talking about teams that have 3 and 4 more points than Minnesota for the season. And yet it feels like there's so much doom and gloom about how the Wild are just spinning. Edmonton's got 2 more points than Minnesota. Do you think that it's panic time in Edmonton or anything? I mean, I think this team's done a remarkable job of piling up points, even though their roster's been decimated and their game has been off because of it. And yet, that's if they can get in, I just don't think same with St. Louis. I mean, right now in the West, I don't think there's a lock first round series to be had, no matter who anybody draws. I mean, St. Louis goes to Winnipeg. You think the Jets are going to be punching tickets for the second round immediately? I mean, that series is going to be a handful.
No, I know. But I mean, a lot of it is what you've done lately. And the reality is that the Wild since January 9th have been one of the worst teams in the league. And that it's timing, Anthony. I mean, you and I have joked before the backing into the playoff thing, but the Wild have 33 points since January 9th. That's 6th worst in the league.
Right. But I agree with that.
By the way, are all non-playoff teams.
Right. And I agree with that. And if this team right now, if the playoffs started tomorrow, I don't think Vegas or Winnipeg, I don't think they're within the sights of this Wild club. I don't think Minnesota with this personnel. But what I'm saying is if you throw those other two guys back in, now all of a sudden, I don't think the Wild feel like a normal wild card entrant because That's more like
Right.
what they were when was the last time they had everybody healthy? It was before Christmas when
Yeah.
Kaprizov,
But to also
he was,
assume that we're going to just see, first of all, Eriksson Ek was having a down year as it was, and do expect that we're going to see the Hart Trophy Kirill Kaprizov when these other teams are going a million miles an hour, and he's played maybe at that point 3 or 4 regular season games. I just think it's.
I agree. That was actually where I was headed next. Was that I'm not assuming that we're going to see those guys at the absolute tip top of their game immediately, but when to go back to where I was a couple of minutes ago, start to look at the lineup and just say, okay, now throw Kaprizov on the top line wing instead of Marcus Foligno, and now put Marcus Foligno on a third line where he probably fits. Just even that move alone. Now put Eriksson Ek on that second line with Boldy and move Gaudreau down to a third line or to a fourth line with Hartman on a third line. It's amazing how different that lineup looks when you throw those two names back in there. And even Kaprizov at 75 or 80% is still an electrifying player. And it's a different club if those guys come back. And, so I just, that's all I'm saying is that I don't look at it as a team that's absolutely limping in. I look at it as a team that could all of a sudden it's almost like a trade deadline acquisition in the final week of the regular season. And imagine what kind of life that injects inside that room. Imagine if you're Matt Zuccarello and all of a sudden for the first time in 3 months, you look over and 97's on your line. Just think about how that invigorates a club, that injects some life into a club.
No doubt about that. And that was some of the talking points after the game last night. And Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek, they flew back to the Twin Cities to skate with Andy Ness and get all the bells and whistles and rehab stuff and treatments at Tria Rink. And, it sure feels like next Wednesday is the time that we could see Kaprizov on the ice. That's total conjecture. But, he'll have a full practice Tuesday. He's been cleared for contact. I don't know if they're recruiting, if Ek's going to be doing the one that's doing the contact or what it is. Ek, I kind of wonder if we're not going to see him until the last regular season game because, for the first time yesterday, Anthony, John Hines just volunteered something that I've said on this podcast since the end of February, and that I was hearing that this was a 6 to 8 week injury, where we're in week 6 right now. I think after what happened with the broken tib fib that Eriksson Ek had, when he broke it, blocking that Malkin shot a couple years ago and tried to come back, late in the playoff and lasted one shift. Anthony, I just think that they are going to make sure that he is 100% healthy. So I think that we're going to see Kaprizov back before Eriksson Ek. What say you?
Yeah, probably. And, that you had mentioned earlier that Eriksson Ek was having a down year, and he may have been playing through some of this stuff for so much longer than what anybody realized.
He has been banged up. He's had myriad injuries this year.
Right. Yep. So, maybe this will be the time where now all of a sudden, if you give him that full rested, 7.5 to 8 weeks, he's rested, he's healthy. And that even when he's having a down year, and it was down, partially early in the year, the power play wasn't great and he wasn't picking up points there. And he certainly was playing through things and therefore was probably down with production, but yet he still night in, night out was one of the most hated players to play against in the NHL. And that's, I don't care if you're playing. If you're all of a sudden playing, think about that Vegas game that we just talked about, the back end of back-to-backs against Dallas. If Jack Eichel's going up against Jules Eriksson Ek all night, that's a totally different night for him than what he had. And that was the Wild at home with matchups. Eichel, there's no Eichel hat trick if Jules Eriksson Ek's on the other side. And maybe the same thing the night before when, you're down in Dallas, and throw those top guns for Dallas against Jules Eriksson Ek instead of, whoever they were playing against all night long. It's a different deal. And that's Nico Hischier isn't piling up big numbers against Jules Eriksson Ek. So
by the way, Anthony, I love that kid. They got some great. That Jesper Bratt, we saw him 2 games in a row. He's awesome, but man, is he sure a good player.
He's really a good player and become one of the elite face-off men in the league, and maybe the top face-off man in the league right now. And he took a little bit longer to develop as a number one overall pick. There were a couple of years there where people thought that, maybe, I don't know about number one overall, but boy, he sure looks like it now. And I agree with you on Jesper Bratt. He's a special player. Now you throw Jack Hughes back in that lineup next year. And it was interesting. I was talking to John Hines about that club, and I said, how similar is their style to the way the Maple Leafs played under Sheldon Keefe? And he thought about it for a minute. He said, it's actually very similar, and the teams are built in very similar fashions, where it's, kind of a fast-paced water bug style approach in the offensive zone with a ton of skill. And I hadn't really looked that closely at the depth of New Jersey's roster, but wow, they've got some offensive talent. And, they picked in the top four times in a 10-year span, and I think they were in the top 10, 7 of those 10 years. And it's pays off. I mean, that's, you look at the players they've got there now. I mean, a couple number one overalls. Luke Hughes was a number 4 overall. They had a 2 in there as well. So it isn't an accident. It isn't a coincidence that they've got some skill. And I think that now the challenge is going to be, can they keep Jack Hughes healthy? This is 2 years in a row that he's been limited to 62 games. And, when he's in there, I think when we were doing those games, we looked it up. I think he had the 11th over the last 3 years, had the 11th best points percentage or points per game in the NHL. But the challenge was that it's 2 years in a row of only 62 games played. So as we've seen with Minnesota, sometimes once guys start to get hurt, that just has a way of continuing. And hopefully that's not the case with him, because I think he's got a chance to be one of those really exciting players to watch if they can keep him on the ice.
Yeah, although not very good in the Four Nations. Let me ask you about faceoffs, Anthony. Last night, Marco Rossi went 0 for 8 against Vincent Trocheck, went 1 for 14 in the game. Trocheck, by the way, went 13 for 13 in the game. Freddie Gaudreau last night, 5 for 19. Ryan Hartman, 8 for 13. Obviously, we know that Eriksson Ek's out. There's not a lot of options. But I was thinking this during the game, like hockey, the one thing about hockey and coaching is it's so different than football and baseball and basketball, where you just got all this data being flowed to you all the time, even real time in games. Unless you're paying attention as a coach or really looking at that game sheet between periods, like to have Marco Rossi open overtime against Vincent Trocheck, who went 8 for 8 against you, it just seemed like a curious decision to me. Like you almost rather a Gaudreau or Hartman come out, try to win the draw, and if you want to then change on the fly immediately and throw Rossi out there, that's a good thing. But it just seemed like right when they threw Rossi out against Trocheck, I'm like, well, the Rangers are going to start with the puck here, and that's what happened. And 24 seconds later, the game was over.
They did. No, what was interesting is,
I guess my big question to you is like, is anybody in John Hines' ear like, hey, by the way, Trocheck's just killing us on the draw? Like, how does that all come down?
Well, so there's a few things there. Number one is they do watch that all night. And we actually talked about it on the broadcast last night, that you've got Marco Rossi, who you normally start every overtime with, but he's only won 1 faceoff on the night. Now, what was interesting is the Rangers have Trocheck, who's undefeated at the time, 13 for 13. And yet they threw JT Miller out to take the first faceoff. Miller won the faceoff, then went to the bench and brought Trocheck on. So think about it, having a guy that's 13 for 13, weird. And you say, yeah, well, you know what it was, and Ryan Carter brought it up, which was a great point, that even though it's a center ice faceoff, it was essentially a strong dot situation for Miller because of the side that the referees dropped the puck. So
interesting.
And so he went with the lefty JT Miller instead of the righty Vincent Trocheck as soon as he saw which side the referee was going to drop the puck. And so because Trocheck was on the ice, he called him to the bench, sent Miller out there. Miller won the faceoff against Rossi, and then immediately goes to the bench, and Trocheck jumps on and scores the winner. And as it was happening, I thought, imagine having a guy who's 13 for 13 and saying, nope, I want to start somebody else because I got another guy who's just as good.
Crazy.
On faceoffs. And Miller he's a 59% faceoff guy for the season. Trocheck's 3rd in the league in faceoff win percentage at just a shade higher than Miller. They're one of the best faceoff teams in the league. So you knew it was going to be a tough night for Minnesota there. I don't think anybody envisioned it being quite that tough, but faceoffs have been an issue for this team for maybe 5, 6, 7 years now, and they continue to fight that battle. I mean, even Eriksson Ek, he's a good face-off man, but he has yet to have a season where he's at 50%. And he just looks like a guy who should be a handful on face-offs. Now, granted, his number gets clipped because he takes a lot of shorthanded draws. He takes a lot of draws against the other team's best and all that. But he just looks to me like he should be a 53, 54% face-off guy. He's big, he's strong, with good hands. Yeah. And yet he's never had a season at 50% in his career. And they've got to find a way to figure this out. I know they, for a couple of years, downplayed it. And I talked to front office and coaching staff a lot about it. And, they downplayed it for a while and doesn't really directly correlate. They'd point to Colorado and say that Colorado is one of the worst face-off teams in the league. And yet, they win a cup. And, but the difference was that they were such a great puck possession team that once they had it, they never gave it back. And so I don't know, there's something has to change with that, because within games, there are always about 8 to 10 faceoffs that are game changers, that are game impact draws. And it feels like the Wild lose 6 out of 8 or 8 out of 10 of those draws so often. And now remember, Marco has had some good success in overtimes on faceoffs lately, where the Wild have started with the puck and never gave it back. But over the course of the season, he was 47% going into last night. And after last night, that's going to be lower. And there was no chance that the Wild were going to win that draw. It's either Miller or Trocheck, and that's at a key point in the game.
Yeah. Who's pretty decent on faceoffs? He's career 48%, but his last 2 years, 52.7 and 52.8. Brock Nelson. I was just looking that up as you were talking. So maybe that's one thing that they're thinking in their head as well. And obviously, I don't know, but maybe Danilo Urov, if he comes over, will have that ability. Next year and beyond to win some draws. I don't know how he is in circle, but that's two guys that maybe could help. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back on Worst Seats in the House.
The weather is warming up, and that means it's time to put your augers away and it's time to grab the boat. Let OnX Fish help you find the next best bite. The Fish app offers the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your success. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. OnX Fish also shows you hotspots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. Download OnX Fish on the App Store or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information about the app that is changing the game.
Boost your savings when you open a money market account at Royal Credit Union. For a limited time, you can get a $1,250 bonus when you bring $100,000 or more in new money to open a personal or business money market account. Royal's money market accounts have no monthly maintenance fee and tiered rates, so higher balances earn more. See details and open a money market account today at rcu.org/earn-more. Minimum deposit of $100,000 required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/24/25. Insured by NCUA.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget. Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com or Pat Egan at 612-220-9819.
Back here, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, final segment of Worst Seats in the House. April 7th is our next live show. That is at Tuttle's at 7 p.m. And then we will have one more live show this month. So pay attention to Talk North's social media on Instagram and Twitter, or X, I guess you can call it. And Anthony's Twitter account, I'm sure you'll retweet me. So, by the way, you did me dirty. You did me dirty last night with your freaking. I cannot stand being in that press box with you over me. You did me dirty on Twitter last night, and you know what you did. Don't try to.
What? Oh, the
pretend that
picture
you're
of
only-
you sitting in somebody else's seat.
Yeah, but you know what I'm pissed about that picture, and you did it intentionally. Don't pretend like you don't know what I'm pissed about.
I actually don't.
The bald spot.
You know what? Margot asked me, she said, I think Russo's going to be mad. And then I never got back to her because she said that to me right before we went on the air. And I didn't know, I forgot to ask her why you'd be mad.
Yeah.
That wasn't I actually was just giving you grief about just feeling like you could sit anywhere because you're Michael Russo of The Athletic. That was the point of the tweet.
I was sitting with my athletic brethren. I had Peter Baugh and Arthur Staple there. Dan Rosen from NHL.com was not at the game, so I took his seat. Fair enough. I even texted Dan. I knew Dan was on OV watch and was down in Raleigh for NHL.com. So I texted him and said, "Guess where I'm sitting tonight? Right at center ice. Your seat."
Yeah.
But anyway,
hey, speaking of the OV watch, and for us, we were lucky because national TV dropped the Wild Ranger game, so we got to pick up an extra game, which was great for us, and they got what they wanted. They got an Ovechkin goal in that game, and I was just kind of doing a little digging, and I mean, there's so many numbers that are just mind-boggling with what Ovechkin has done. But one of the things that was most amazing to me is when you look at the career, he's 2 goals behind Gretzky, two games behind Gretzky. There's a chance that he could end up with the exact number of goals in the exact number of games.
It's wild.
And it is. And we were talking a little bit, I don't know, a week or so ago about it. And when you think about the time that Ovechkin missed during the prime of his career, lost a season to a lockout early in his career, but then lost a half a season to another lockout, lost a part of a season to COVID 2 years in a row, and those were during years where he was scoring at a high rate. But so there's that. But then the other part is then start to think about just how unbelievable Gretzky's numbers are. We're talking about a guy, I mean, he has more than double the number of assists that Ovechkin has. And people think of him as the greatest playmaker in the history of the NHL, and he was. And yet he also happened to score this many goals. I mean, we're talking about Ovechkin as one of the great goal-scoring specialists, best power play scorer in the history of the league. And yet Gretzky was that plus the greatest playmaker the game's ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm with you. It's really unreal. The guy I always look at here, and I wonder if, I don't know if Ovi would be chasing his record if he played a full career, but they'd be very close, is Mike Bossy. The guy played 9 years in the NHL, just 50 goal. It's a shame that his career was cut off. You know what I'm seeing tonight, Anthony? Glengarry Glen Ross, the play. It's on Broadway. Listen to this cast. All right, Kieran Culkin, from Succession, Bob Odenkirk, the stand-up comic. Obviously, everybody knows him for Breaking Bad. Bill Burr, one of my favorite stand-up comics. Love his podcast. Huge hockey fan too. And Mark McKean, Michael McKean. I mean, who's Laverne and Shirley. Great in Curb Your Enthusiasm. Obviously, he's been in so many different things. Also, Better Call Saul, things like that. So I'm super excited about this. Absolutely excited to see this show tonight. What are you doing tonight? You saw a Broadway show the other night, right?
We did. We saw Hamilton on the off night in Manhattan. I hadn't seen it before. It was terrific. I hadn't been to a Broadway show in, I was trying to remember how many years. I want to say it was 10 years. And Jersey Boys was the last show I saw out here. And it was terrific. It exceeded my expectations. I thought it was awesome. I don't know a single person in the cast, but it was but the cast was great. The talent, I'm always just amazed by the talent, and I'm also amazed by the choreography for the whole thing with how all these moving parts are so well oiled and just executed to perfection. They had a rotating stage for part of this that was so perfectly executed with, now they do this part and this part of the stage is spinning clockwise, this part's going counterclockwise, and people running pieces of the set on and off. It was, I'm really just amazed by the whole production, and I've always loved the talent of live entertainment, whether it be shows like this, or I actually went to a pretty cool little jazz spot Sunday night when I had dinner down in the Tribeca neighborhood on our off night before the game in New Jersey, and went to a little jazz spot that I really liked, Django, and saw a little 3-piece jazz band that was, probably by jazz standards, nothing special, but I just love watching live music, live entertainment, live performances like that. It's amazing.
You have to meet my friend Casey Levy once. She's a huge Broadway star. In fact, she just booked, I can't say what they are, but she's just booked 2 shows in a row. One where they're actually
I thought I did meet her once. Didn't we have dinner with?
You might have met her. Yeah, my buddy, Dave Reeser's. Probably Dave Reeser is my buddy. That's her husband. But she's been in everything. I mean, Wicked, Hairspray, Hair, Ghost, Frozen. I mean, it's just everything. So you'd love her, and she could just fill you up with knowledge. And she's Canadian, so big hockey fan too.
Unfortunately, I wasn't invited to the show with you tonight, so I don't know what I'm going to do tonight.
Well,
I might go
what happened was
to Primola, which is one of my favorite Italian spots up on the Upper East Side. I may head up there for dinner. I'm not sure yet.
So I'm going to the show alone tonight. So I was at the GM's meetings a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was this play that Glenn Ross opened on one of the dates that I was down there. So I was scrolling Twitter, and people were just going on and on about the cast. And so I just went online at like 1 a.m. and bought 1 ticket. They were pretty penny. All right, let's go to some Twitter questions, because I got a big meeting at the New York Times here in about 25 minutes here. Jason Hughes, good question. Who are some players that you guys love to watch that don't get the national exposure? That's a pretty good question, Anthony. Anybody that's jumping to your mind? He's starting to get more and more national composure, but I really like the game of Wyatt Johnston. I love watching guys like Seth Jarvis and Sebastian Aho. Clayton Keller has just been awesome this year. Anybody that pops into your head?
Yeah, Wyatt Johnston's a good one, actually. I mean, I think right here in Minnesota, Spurgeon and Brodin always come to mind, because they're 2 guys that when you watch them every night, you gain such an appreciation. And Joel Eriksson Ek probably falls into that category, although he probably starting to get more and more national exposure as a shutdown guy when you even think about how Sweden used him in the Four Nations. But around the league, I think I actually kind of like the Wyatt Johnston call. Clayton Keller, not as much. I think he's a highly skilled player. His game is getting more and more complete, but he has a little bit more maybe flair to him than substance sometimes, I think. It's a good question.
I really like Jesper. I'm telling you, you can almost make a case that Jesper Bratt is New Jersey's best player. He is a hell of a hockey player, Anthony. Trying to think of anybody else that pops in my head. Yeah.
I'm going to think about that for a second while you go on to the next question.
Yeah. Kairu's turning into a really good player, not only just because he roasts the Wild, but even like the other night, like the Wild are this close to finally getting St. Louis to lose a game, and Kairu ties the game up with 30 seconds left, and then they beat Detroit in overtime and Cam Fowler's shot. Random Nick asks, are there any college free agents the Wild are actually interested in? I've been writing it in my insider probably for a month, but Tim Washy from Western Michigan is one guy I could see the Wild pursuing on a contract that would probably start next year. Andrew asks, what's the update with Danilo Urov? No update. I mean, his contract ends May 31st. What is going on there?
Yeah, sorry. I just walked by a guy playing a guitar. I'm going to keep walking. I didn't realize he had I didn't realize he had a speaker pointed the other direction. So when I was only a few steps behind him, I didn't hear anything. And all of a sudden, as soon as I got past him, I was like, oh boy, this isn't going to be good.
That is funny. Danilo Europe, somebody asked me about update on him. Actually, sat down with somebody pretty tight with him yesterday for about 90 minutes, and really nothing's going on. I mean, it is not a 100% guarantee the Wild sign him. Like they're, I think his agency is still playing the old game of, you can re-sign in the KHL or the NHL. But obviously the Wild are going to pursue him hard, try to get him signed, and then he will not ever step foot in Des Moines. Like, he is going to have to make the team, or he's not coming. Essentially, that's what it's going to come down to. Obviously, he's had some injuries the last couple of years. Shoulder, just came back from ankle surgery. His team just won their first game in a 4-game series. They were down 3-0. So right now, at least as of now, they're still alive. What do you think of Gabe Perreault's performance yesterday, Anthony? He's nifty. He had a couple great plays on the power play. Somebody asked that, Gabe Perreault.
He certainly looked like a guy you can see why he was touted the way he's been touted. Showed some flashes of it, but I also thought there were 6 plays where you realize just how big the difference is from the NHL or the NCAA to the NHL. Just the speed, the strength, the attention to detail. He coasted a bit in his own zone that led directly to one of the Wild goals. He was getting pushed off pucks by everybody, and we commented on the broadcast that Marco Rossi ate him up behind the net one time, and it was welcome to the NHL, bud. I mean, this is Zuccarello picked his pocket a couple times where I think he just thought he was clear sailing, and all of a sudden here's a guy with world-class hands that popped my stick up and grabbed the puck from me, and all of a sudden he's on the break the other way. So there were some moments like that, but I also think there were moments where you saw the skill that would be like, hey, this is one of those guys around whom you build, and you don't, this is the guy that you don't trade, because this would be the fear, like, if we move this guy to add let's say a defenseman or something, and all of a sudden we could live to regret it forever, because he could be a 30-goal, 60, 70-point guy throughout his career. And I think he looks like that kind of guy. I also watched Ryan Leonard's debut with the Capitals, and wow, he did not look intimidated at all by the jump to the NHL. He made some physical plays in that game that were significant. That was a great gesture by Ovechkin, on an off day, went up to BC to welcome him to the Capital organization. Yeah. And the more and more that Ovechkin has aged, the more and more respect I have for the kind of player and leader he's been. And I know he got a lot of grief early in his career when the Caps couldn't beat the Penguins, and it was all Ovechkin's about the numbers and Crosby's about the winning. And I just don't know if that was fair, because I think this guy is, and maybe he's matured and changed, but boy, he sure has handled things perfectly here late in his career.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how Gabe Perreault does without Ryan Leonard, and because Gabe Perreault this year was not the same player without Will Smith. So we will see. OC boys, a couple more minutes in the show, Anthony, then we'll let you get you on your way. Wild Boys 59.
Yeah, get on my way. I'm not the one with this big time meeting at the New York Times.
I know. Maybe this is my last day. What if I walk in that meeting and all of a sudden HR follows me in? Wild Boys 59 goes, would offer sheeting a guy like Matthew Knies have intrigued you this offseason if we had all of our original picks? I think somebody is really going to look at that if they can't re-sign him. Obviously, what Wild Boys is saying is that to offer sheet somebody, I put it in my big offer sheet story today, national story, but you need all your original picks. The Wild traded their second-round pick in 2026 in the Gus Nyquist deal. So if the Wild were going to offer sheet somebody in the Matthew Knies category or a JJ Peterka category, they would essentially have to do what St. Louis did last year and reacquire that pick, because you need your original picks. So the only way the Wild could make a move like this would to go to Nashville and basically offer them to try to get that 2026 second-round pick back. But yeah, Knies is awfully intriguing, right?
Well, for sure he is, but I don't know how. I don't think it's a very realistic situation that he lands here. But I'm for sure intrigued by the guy. I think he's a heck of a player, and I think somehow, some way, Toronto figures out a way to keep him there. When we were in Toronto and talking a lot about him, and
especially if Marner leaves, right?
Right.
Especially
and when we were up there,
leaves.
though, and talking to them because of his Minnesota ties, there were a lot of conversation, and the guys in Toronto love him. I mean, the team likes him, the media likes him, the fans love him. I got to believe they find a way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But it is interesting. I mean, they got some tight issues to make, especially because John Tavares has had a great year. So obviously they're going to want to bring him back. Wild Boys also has plays even the playoffs just for the experience. It will serve him well. Do you agree with that? I mean, it's not like, Declan Chisholm showed that he should stay in the lineup. And, I don't know if they're going to pull John Merrill out of the lineup for Zeev Boyum, especially now that he's only going to get, maximum one game in a Wild uniform after the Frozen Four. But what do you think the chances that we're going to see Zeev in the playoffs, or at least to start the playoffs?
I think 0 that we see him to start the playoffs, and not much more than 0 that we see him in the playoffs, unless something bizarre happens, like if there's another major injury or something like that. This is based on me watching Denver play maybe 3 or 4 times this year. And I don't know that it was different when Brock Faber came. His game was NHL ready. I don't see quite the same when I watch Boyum play. I see a highly skilled guy who's going to run a power play for a long time in this league, but I don't know that his game is airtight in his own zone right now, and part of that is the way Denver plays. I mean, I think there's a looseness to their game that wouldn't fly in the NHL, and not that means that he won't be ready and can't be coached to be ready fast. But I think when you head in, John Merrill he's been terrific, and he's been really good down the stretch, defensively responsible. And, now everything can change if, let's say, you get into a playoff series and you drop the first 2 games and you go 0 for 7 on the power play, and all of a sudden the season's on the line, and we got this kid right here that's got some skill. Can we hide him for 10 minutes or 12 minutes on a third pair and use him on the power play? So things can change, but I don't think it's very likely that we see a guy come in and do what Brock Faber did a couple of years ago, where in 2 games, he looked so good and so ready for NHL level play that he wound up in the playoffs. And remember, even though he played in the playoffs, he was only playing like 10, 12 minutes a night in those games. This was not the Brock Faber playing 30 minutes a night that we saw then throughout his rookie campaign. So even Faber, as ready as he was a guy that played a very small role in that playoff series.
Yeah, wasn't he was third pair with Merrill,
third pair,
right?
yes.
If I remember, or am I wrong? Yeah, with Merrill.
I can't remember if he was with Merrill, but I know he only played, it was like between 10 and 14 minutes a night throughout that series.
Yeah, I cannot remember at all who the left shot D would have been, because Goligoski was pretty much scratched. Addison was pretty much scratched, because Klingberg came too. All right, last 2 quickies, and then we do have to wrap up the show because I got to walk 3 blocks to the New York Times here. But Walter Norris asks what happens with Hinostroza going forward. Hinostroza actually has an extra year on his deal, so that's good. So he'll be back. This one is interesting. Walter also goes, if I'm irate if I'm Brian Hartman and saw Chatfield avoid suspension for his nuclear level slew foot last night in that fight. It was, I don't know if that was a danger. It was considered a slew foot, but it certainly was dangerous. He's got McMichael without his helmet on and just trips him in a fight and puts him right on his back. Absolutely dangerous. Hartman, though, I can't imagine lately with his penalties in the third period and then the overturned goal last night that the Wild are very happy with him right now either, Anthony.
No, it's too bad, because his game had been really good since coming back from suspension, and it wasn't quite at the level that he had scored a couple of years ago when he had his big 34 goal season, but he had looked more like that player, was making plays and was just playing a more disciplined, responsible game. And these last couple, it's been a little bit of a slip, but I think his game has just been off, and maybe he's a guy that just needs to have a reset in the off season and come back. And, something like what we saw from Freddie Gaudreau after his year last year, where he was fighting injuries throughout the year, fighting some, frustration and disappointment and responsibility type stuff. And then all of a sudden had his reset in the offseason and came back and has been terrific. And maybe that's what Hartman needs right now. Just needs an offseason and then come back. And maybe he's a guy, sometimes guys just need a solidified role. And he's been up and down the lineup all year. He's been to the wing. He's been back in the middle. And maybe he's a guy that would just thrive on, all right, here's what we think you can bring. Here's the guys you're going to play with. Let her rip, and let's see how the season goes.
All right, good podcast. April 7th, our next live show, 7 p.m. at Tuttle's. Thanks to our incredible sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Clamshell Beach Resorts, Beller's Ranch, Giggly THC Beverages, Onyx Maps, Twill and the Edina Galleria, and Royal Credit Union. Thanks, Anthony.
You bet.
So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world